Good afternoon. By 2030, 95% of companies will fail to meet their net zero targets. That's my prediction. That's not written down anywhere, but this is my prediction. If I'm wrong, you will all have a hearty laugh and we can all cheer at the success. If I'm right, it means we need to categorically rethink our definition of net zero. The Science Based Targets Initiative defined net zero as a 50% carbon emission reduction in 2030 and a 90% reduction in 2050. As soon as last year, we have seen companies fail to hit their year 1 and 2 targets. So, are we about to drive off a cliff into the unknown with an unworkable definition, or will we realise we need to rethink, repivot, and reassess the situation? One of the problems with our definition of net zero is it is fundamentally antithetical to growth. About 2 months ago, over 100 companies had their net zero commitments removed. Now, these were big companies. Some of these you would know as household names, well-known brands. And some of them were even in the climate space, renewable technologies, natural capital, generating carbon credits. And if you're here today representing a small and medium enterprise, an SME, you'll be very much forgiven for thinking, how on earth am I going to get my organisation, my network, my responsibility to a net zero situation? One of the problems is that the idea of net zero ultimately places a carbon budget. So it sets a ceiling on the amount of carbon you emit and it wants you to track down carbon over the years ahead. So far, so good. However, the problem is that that doesn't work in our current model. SMEs need to grow, they need to innovate, they need to be the generators of new ideas, new concepts, and be the big companies of tomorrow. The current definition of net zero works pretty well if you're a big incumbent company that sits in your marketplace with control and dominance in your market and in a low growth situation. For all others, it gets increasingly harder the further you go up these two axes shown here. Let me give you a couple of practical examples. The companies on one side of this slide were household names until literally a few years ago. They've all gone bust, disappeared in one way or another, or are an absolute shadow of their former selves. The other side are companies that literally did not exist 20 years ago or were the germ of an idea in a small Californian garage. The point is, all companies go from tiny, small, innovative SMEs to big beasts. Now these companies are multi-billion or even $1 trillion company. The point is, the net zero definition doesn't work for these companies. It didn't work in their ascension, and it might maybe at best work now. Interesting fact is that the majority of companies do not make it to their 20th birthday. Most companies will fail before then. And the companies that we will have, the organisations that we'll have in our economies, in our sectors, and we'll be used to in the 2040s, half of them won't even exist and be here today. So we need a definition for net zero, for decarbonisation, that works with the dynamic nature of our economy and the way business works. We need something that rethinks it fundamentally. One of the problems with our current approach to sustainability and decarbonisation is a steady state mindset. We see things fixed and we just want to extrapolate them out to the future and say, let's go down that path. This is living in a theoretical world and it ignores the complexities of pandemics, global cycles, wars. I mean, if we just look back in the last 3 years, we know how turbulent the world can be. We've got to realise that that is endemic in our existence, in our economies, and we need a way, a methodology of decarbonisation that factors in reality. One of the other issues we have is we neglect the importance of technology in that transition. If we go back to the early industrial revolution, as demonstrated by this trade-off triangle. If we wanted to get a higher economic output or a higher quality of living, we would have to trash the environment. And those trade-offs were very, very stark. We used to go out and hunt whales, so we had blubber to burn, to light homes, and to lubricate machinery. Thankfully, we've left that behind, and now we have petrochemicals, and I think we can agree that's an improvement. Contrary to popular belief, all of our use of energy has got many, many times more efficient. We use less land to produce more food. Our environmental impacts are much less than they were per unit of output. And now we live to over 80 in the Western world. Unfortunately, 100, 200 years ago, most people wouldn't make it past 40 years old, so we can be thankful of this. And we need to stop thinking about fossil fuels as the original sin. They are the conveyor belt that's got us to this magnificent life most of us enjoy. And it's the transition, the stepping stone we need to get to the new point in 2050 or whenever it may be, where we finally crack the trade-off and we're able to get increased quality of life, more leisure time, hopefully more disposable income and the pleasures of life for a lower environmental impact. So, we've covered why the definitions don't work, the steady state, the limitations, and how they tend to ignore the role of technology and the importance that technology will play in the transition to net zero. My personal prediction and analysis of the situation is the current technologies we have may only bring us 25, 30% carbon reduction, and we need much, much more. So we need something that is much, much bigger, much bolder, and with innovation at its heart. This is the theoretical transition pathway that we're supposed to be on the left-hand side. A nice, like clockwork, 4 to 5% reduction per annum all the way out to 2050. In reality, I can tell you from personal experience working with hundreds of companies and thousands of sustainability projects in the last 15 years, that this is not the way things work. If you want to know how it is, you go into a company, an organisation of any description, we work out where we are in year 1 or 2, we maybe do the low-hanging fruit, whatever we can. Then we work out what the big goal is. We're playing the medium-term game here. A new production, a new approach, a new business model, whatever it might be. We can do that in year 3, 4, 5 even. That's what we need to save up, to invest in, and to get that kind of drop in carbon emissions. Sometimes we even will increase emissions in year 3 to get a big saving in year 5. The key thing is we need to see the reality of the situation. We are looking at progress over perfection, and that is the big difference between real life decarbonisation and theoretical decarbonisation goals. So we advocate an approach, a method that everybody can play. And it gets a bit technical and a bit geeky, but ultimately we are looking at something called an intensity metric. And what this means is we want to score everyone, no matter what company you are, what size you are, wherever you are in the world, on the same basis. And that means we measure you on your carbon efficiency. So how much carbon do you emit for producing that many t-shirts or producing that much turnover? That is the way we need to measure companies. We need to not put budgets on them and try and instill unachievable goals. Now, so you will be thinking, hang on a second, doesn't that mean that carbon can increase for an organisation of some description if we just measure them intensity? And you are 100% right. But the problem is a bad accounting practice. If company A halves their emissions, but company B, C, D are apathetic, complacent, they can't play the game and just sit where they are and don't play the decarbonisation game, we are no better off. What we need to do is we need to look at the big picture. What matters is the sector, everyone in it, and then zooming out to the global economy. That's what matters. We don't want to zoom in laser-like into one company and miss the bigger picture. One of the problems we have in this approach to carbon accountancy and geeky kind of measurements and quantifications of carbon is we fall into what we term the territorial trap, and it's a bit like whack-a-mole. We look at, say, the UK carbon budget, we say you can't build a third runway at Heathrow because, it's going to increase the UK's carbon budget, but then the flights will go to Schiphol, Paris or Frankfurt. The point is, It doesn't matter what flights necessarily come to the UK, it matters around total flights and total flight emissions, and you can extrapolate this out all the way. The UK government is quite happy to say we have reduced our emissions, the UK, by 44% since 1990. And that is absolutely true if you measure territorial direct emissions in the UK. What's actually happened is we've deindustrialised, and now our emissions come in through diesel-powered boats from Asia. So what's the point in having a definition where we claim success over here and we kind of ignore the failure over here? What matters is the big macro picture. And for the final concern that you may have is, what about overconsumption and consumption more broadly? And this truly is an issue. It's something that we need to contend with in the kind of the 2 billion populaces of people that have luxuries, disposable income. We have a great standard of life. We've got to contend with that, but we have 6 billion people in the world that are aspiring to better longevity, more free time, the luxuries of life. And I would say no one in this room, myself, has the right to tell them they can't have that and deny that to them. That sounds a lot like carbon colonialism. So we need to accept the fact that this is happening. People will want things, we want consumption. They want consumption, and we're going to have to find a way around this. So, what are we advocating? We need a method of measurement and a way to evaluate everyone's performance, a method that everyone can play. It needs to be inclusive, all companies, all geographies. It needs to be pro-innovation, put technology, new ideas, the ideas that are going to solve climate issues, new technologies right at the heart of it. Just imagine what would it be like if we put the same energy, effort, resources, international cooperation into finding climate solutions as we did the COVID-19 pandemic. We would be in a completely different place in 2030. So that's what we're advocating, a new way of looking at the problem and a radical approach to innovation and new ideas. And I genuinely believe with the combination of those two, we stand a very good chance of decarbonising and being in a much, much better place in 2050. Thank you very much.